It all started when my wife burst into the room with eyes lit up like she had just won the lottery. She had just returned from work and didn't even bother to take off her coat before announcing that I was in for a little surprise. Naturally, I asked what kind of surprise, but she only gave me a sly smile and said, "We're having guests tonight, and they're bringing us some really great news." That caught me off guard. Guests? Good news? We didn't see family often, and I couldn't imagine anyone suddenly showing up with anything exciting. I asked her, half joking, "Don't tell me your friend is pregnant again." She rolled her eyes at me and called me an idiot before saying it wasn't that at all. She then insisted we needed to get the house in order because, apparently, our surprise visitors couldn't be welcomed into anything less than a spotless home. That's when my day took a sharp turn. I wasn't about to argue, so I got to work alongside her. We cleaned every corner of the house, polished the furniture, and cooked enough food to feed a small army. By the time we were done, the place looked immaculate, and the kitchen smelled like a feast was about to happen. As much as I wanted to relax for a moment, my mind kept wandering back to who these guests could be and what news they had. I didn't like surprises, and this one felt particularly odd. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I was the one to answer. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing there weren't any family members or anyone I could remotely consider good news bringers. Instead, it was my wife's two best friends. They waltzed in, full of energy and giggles, like they owned the place. Before I could even process what was happening, one of them made some inappropriate joke about a group activity I'd rather not mention. I didn't react well to that. My face must have shown exactly how unimpressed I was, but they just laughed it off and made themselves comfortable on the couch. They didn't waste much time getting to the point. One of them announced, with far too much enthusiasm, that they both had quit their jobs. I nearly choked on my own breath hearing that. My wife worked as a graphic designer with a decent salary, and her job was flexible, remote or in office, as she pleased. It was stable, straightforward, and required minimal drama. Quitting a job like that without a solid backup plan sounded like madness to me. I asked, "What in the world made you think that was a good idea?" My wife shrugged and said something about her workplace being too dull, the people there being boring, and needing more fun in her life. Fun? Since when was fun the measure of a good job? I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her what she planned to do next. Before she could answer, one of her friends chimed in with the most ridiculous explanation I'd ever heard. Apparently, her best friend had a boyfriend who was well connected in a major company, and they were invited to some party where everything would be sorted out. "We'll meet him there," her friend said with a grin, "and he'll set us up." I couldn't help myself. That's your grand plan? Meeting some rich boyfriend at a party and hoping he magically hands you a job? You don't think he might be an arrogant idiot who'll just use you and toss you aside? Free cheese is only found in a mousetrap, you know. My words hit a nerve. They all exchanged looks, then my wife's friend groaned and rolled her eyes. "You're always such a killjoy," she said. "We're invited, and that's final. The party's in 3 days, so get ready." The days leading up to the party were filled with nothing but chatter. My wife was glued to her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she exchanged messages with her friends. Every conversation revolved around the same topics: which perfume to wear, what dress would make the best impression, and how to behave to win favor. I couldn't take it anymore. "Listen," I said firmly one evening, "there's only one way to earn respect from someone, and it's not by kissing their ass. The way you're all acting, it's like you're trying to steal this guy from his girlfriend, not land a job. Just be yourself, for once." She rolled her eyes at me, like always, and mumbled something about me possibly being right, but I could tell she wasn't about to change her plans. Finally, the day of the party arrived. We drove up to a massive house, a full-blown mansion, really, with cars lined up along the driveway. My wife and her friends were all aflutter, buzzing with excitement as we parked. I kept my thoughts to myself, but I was already skeptical about how this was going to go. We walked in together, greeted by a sea of unfamiliar faces, and there he was, the so-called major player and his girlfriend. He came forward with a big, toothy grin, hugging everyone like we were all long-lost friends. I immediately noticed the way his eyes lingered on my wife, scanning her in a way that made my blood boil. Then he looked at me, and his expression turned from cheerful to disdainful in an instant. We shook hands, though I could already tell he wasn't interested in pleasantries. He leaned in close and, with a smirk, said, "If you're trying to make an impression, you might want to rethink your cologne." I stared at him for a moment, incredulous, before replying coldly, "If you're trying to make an impression, you might want to rethink talking down to people you've just met." My wife and her friend jumped in immediately, breaking the tension and urging us to not measure balls and just enjoy the evening. Reluctantly, we stepped back from the brink, but the tension didn't disappear. The guy had the nerve to mutter, "This is only for your wife's sake," as we sat down. I bit my tongue, but it was clear he was testing my patience. Throughout the evening, I kept an eye on my wife and her friends as they buzzed around him, laughing at his jokes and hanging on his every word. I leaned over to my wife and said, "Just be yourself. That's all you need to do." She nodded distractedly but didn't seem to take my advice to heart. Meanwhile, the guy's girlfriend sat quietly, occasionally chiming in, but mostly observing. It struck me how different she was from the rest of them, calm, almost detached from the chaos around her. The conversation eventually turned to business. Everyone wanted to know more about the company, the roles available, and how they could fit in. The guy played his part well, smiling and throwing out vague promises. Then, finally, he made his announcement, "Congratulations, you've got the job." Just like that. My wife and her friends were ecstatic, their faces lighting up as if he'd handed them golden tickets. I stayed quiet, not fully trusting how easily this had all come together. At some point, I stepped outside to smoke and gather my thoughts. A few minutes later, the guy joined me. He lit his cigarette and exhaled before saying, "Maybe I was a little harsh earlier. But you need to lighten up. Say thank you. Your wife just landed the best job of her life, probably better than yours, too." I turned to him, my voice steady. "I'm here for my wife, not you. And if you want people to respect you, maybe start by treating them like humans, not pawns. Just a thought." He gave a half-hearted shrug, muttered something about me being difficult, and walked back inside. When he returned to the room, he climbed onto a chair and tapped his glass for attention. "Listen up, everyone," he said, his voice booming. "Most of you are part of this amazing company, and I have exciting news. In 2 weeks, we're hosting a top-secret corporate event. Details will follow, but trust me, it's going to be unforgettable." The room erupted into cheers, though I couldn't help but feel like there was something off about him. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself. As the night wound down, my wife and I said our goodbyes, thanking the hosts and exchanging pleasantries with the other guests. Despite the strange moments, my wife seemed genuinely happy, and I wasn't about to ruin it for her. We got in the car and drove home, the buzz of the evening still lingering in the air. The ride back home was quiet, but the moment we stepped through the door, my wife's mood erupted like fireworks. She couldn't stop gushing about the party. "How about that?" she asked, beaming. "Wasn't it amazing? I met so many people tonight. It felt like a completely new world." I wasn't about to mirror her enthusiasm. Instead, I leaned against the counter and said bluntly, "I learned something tonight too, how to hate someone in under a minute. Did you even notice the way that guy was staring at you? Or how he couldn't wait to unload his garbage onto me?" Her smile faded as she crossed her arms and replied, "You couldn't just let it slide. A lot depended on tonight, and you had to get into a pissing contest with him." I shook my head, refusing to back down. If I'd kept my mouth shut, I wouldn't be your husband. If you're into spineless men who can't speak up when disrespected, maybe that's the crowd you belong with. Because I guarantee he treats everyone like dirt. Her face flushed with irritation, and she accused me of blowing things out of proportion. I let it rest, but the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. For the next couple of days, our conversations were short and clipped. It felt like we were strangers sharing the same roof. Eventually, she broke the silence. One evening, she came to me with an apologetic tone, admitting that she had been a little too harsh. "I thought about it," she said. "Maybe you're right. I shouldn't have dismissed your feelings so quickly." That was her way of making peace, and I accepted it. Life seemed to get back to normal, at least for the time being. Then, out of nowhere, she received a message confirming that she could start her new job. The excitement returned to her voice as she shared the news with me. I congratulated her, though I couldn't shake the feeling that this would come with complications. After her first day at work, she came home glowing. "It was great," she said, practically bouncing with joy. "The office is beautiful, and I'm working in the same department as my friends. It's like a dream come true." I nodded, happy for her, until she added, "There's one thing, though. You're not going to like it." That got my attention. She hesitated before explaining, "The head of our department is that guy, you know, the one from the party." "And his girlfriend?" "She's the deputy." I stared at her, letting the information sink in. "So, the guy who couldn't resist making a scene at his own party is now your boss?" "Sounds perfect," I said, the sarcasm dripping from my words. She frowned, trying to downplay the situation. "It's not like I'm working directly under him all the time. He oversees everything, but will hardly interact. Besides, his girlfriend seems nice." "Nice?" I shot back. "If he pulls anything inappropriate, you know what I'll do. I won't let anyone treat you like some office ornament." She sighed, clearly frustrated by my tone. "You're jumping to conclusions," she said. "Nothing's happened, and you're already acting like you need to step in. Let me handle it, okay?" I wasn't convinced, but I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Fine," I said, "but if he so much as looks at you the wrong way, you tell me. I'll make sure he regrets it." She rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath about me always expecting the worst. Despite her attempts to brush it off, I could tell she wasn't entirely comfortable either. As she got ready for bed, she turned to me and said softly, "Just don't get worked up over nothing. He's my boss, and I'll deal with him. You don't need to get involved unless there's a real reason." Her words were meant to reassure me, but they only added to the knot in my stomach. I looked her in the eye and said, "I'll try. But you know me. I don't let things slide." She nodded, a faint smile on her lips, and said, "Don't start anything. Promise me that much." A few weeks had passed, and things had settled into a routine. One morning, as my wife was getting ready for work, she mentioned the upcoming corporate event. "Remember that corporate party I told you about?" she asked. "It's happening tonight. After work, our whole department is staying late to celebrate, and there will probably be people from other departments too. It's supposed to be a big deal." She seemed excited, but I kept my face neutral. "If anyone crosses a line," I said flatly, "call me." She laughed it off, saying everything would be fine, but I wasn't entirely convinced. As much as I disliked the idea of her being around those people, I knew it was important for her to fit in. Getting comfortable in the workplace and building connections was a key part of succeeding. I wasn't about to stop her, even if the thought nagged at me. Still, I made it clear I was just a phone call away. She gave me a quick hug before leaving, assuring me again that it would be nothing but a normal evening. I let her go, hoping I wouldn't regret it. The hours dragged on after she left. I tried to keep myself busy, but every so often, I would glance at my phone, waiting for an update. Around the time the party should have been winding down, I decided to check in. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Maybe she was just caught up in the moment, I thought, but as the hours ticked by and she still didn't answer, my patience wore thin. By the time midnight rolled around, I was pacing the living room, phone in hand, debating whether I should drive over there myself. She finally stumbled through the door in the early hours of the morning, clearly drunk. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and she reeked of alcohol. "Looks like you had a great time," I said dryly, crossing my arms. She mumbled something incoherent, then slurred, "I'll tell you everything in the morning. I'm too tired now." Before I could respond, she collapsed onto me, burying her face in my chest. I sighed, scooped her up, and carried her to bed. Whatever had happened could wait until morning. The next day, I woke up to her shaking my shoulder. "You won't believe what happened last night," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and embarrassment. She launched into a detailed recount of the evening, talking about how the people at her company really knew how to party. Then she dropped the bombshell. "Oh, and don't worry about that guy. He was glued to his girlfriend the whole time. But get this, the party ended with a swinger event." Can you imagine? I stared at her, stunned. "A what?" I demanded. She laughed nervously. "Relax. I didn't stick around for that part. I left when things started getting weird. But my friends, well, they said it was wild. Since they don't have boyfriends, they felt free to join in." My shock turned to anger. "You're telling me your workplace hosted a swinger party and you think this is funny?" She rolled her eyes. "I told you, I didn't participate. I just thought you'd find it interesting." I wasn't amused. "Let me make this clear," I said sharply. "From now on, you're not going to those events. I don't care if it's just sitting around drinking wine. If this is the kind of culture they're encouraging, I don't trust it. You can socialize during work hours, but these after-hours parties are off-limits." She looked offended. "You don't think I can control myself?" she asked. "It's not about you," I replied. "It's about the company you keep." The argument escalated briefly, with her accusing me of being overprotective and me standing firm on my position. She insisted she could handle herself, but I wasn't budging. Eventually, we both grew tired of the back and forth and let the conversation fizzle out. For now, the issue was settled, though I had a feeling it wouldn't be the last time we clashed over this. A few weeks later, my wife came home looking unusually excited. She dropped her bag and immediately launched into a story about a new project at work. "We're designing metro tickets," she said, practically bouncing on her heels. "It's a government contract. Can you believe it? I'm working on it with my friends, and we'll be handling it all ourselves. It's such a big deal." I nodded, acknowledging her enthusiasm. "Sounds impressive," I said. "Just be careful. I still don't trust some of those friends of yours. They've been a bad influence before." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on," she said. "That was a one-time thing. And it wasn't even me involved. Who are we to judge others, anyway?" I let it go, but her words didn't exactly put me at ease. Over the next several days, she came home late more often than usual. Each time, she had the same excuse: "We're making real progress on the project. It's going to be amazing when it's done." I didn't push too hard, but I reminded her to keep an eye on her priorities. The late nights were adding up, and I wasn't sure this project was worth the toll it was taking. Still, she assured me it was under control, and I decided to trust her for now. One evening, she came to me with a new twist. "You won't believe this," she said, practically glowing. "We figured out how to turn this project into an opportunity for a promotion. If it's successful, it'll happen around the same time as the birthday of that guy from the party. His girlfriend told us about it, and she suggested we make it special." My expression must have betrayed my skepticism, because she added quickly, "Don't worry. It's just a little extra effort. It'll be worth it." Then she dropped the real surprise. His girlfriend also asked me to bake a huge birthday cake for the occasion. You know, I've always loved baking. It's my dream to work with professional equipment, and her family owns a small bakery with everything I could ever need. We're going to make the cake together. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. "That's a lot to juggle," I said. "The project and now this cake? How are you going to manage both?" She waved off my concerns with a confident smile. "It'll be fine," she said. "She's the deputy manager, remember? She said I could leave work a bit early to help out at the bakery. It's all arranged." I wasn't entirely convinced, but I decided to let it play out. "What about your friends?" I asked. "Aren't they going to feel left out if you're working closely with his girlfriend?" "They've got their own stuff to worry about," she replied. "One of them even said that if he weren't taken, she'd have already slept with him." "Can you believe that?" Her tone was half amused, half exasperated. "Honestly, it's a good thing I'm helping his girlfriend. She's obviously bothered by all the attention he gets, and I can support her while building a better relationship. It's a win-win." I leaned back in my chair, mulling it over. Her logic wasn't bad, and I could see how much this meant to her. "All right," I said finally. "Do what you think is best. Just make sure you're not stretching yourself too thin. And don't let anyone take advantage of you." She nodded, her enthusiasm undimmed. "Don't worry," she said. "I've got this." After about a week of her busy schedule, my wife dropped a new piece of news on me one evening. "Listen," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "The guy from work, you know, him and his girlfriend might come over soon. She and I have become good friends, and I think this could be a good opportunity for us. Having connections like theirs in the company is invaluable. It's a harmless gathering, and you'll be here to keep an eye on things. Just promise me you'll be polite, okay?" No sharp comments. I could see she was serious about this, so I reluctantly agreed. "Fine," I said. "But don't expect me to play host if he starts acting like a jerk." As the day of their visit approached, we both got to work preparing. My wife cleaned the house top to bottom while I focused on the food. I decided to go all out and called my father, who ran a small ranch. He always had the best cuts of meat, and I knew I could count on him to help me marinate it perfectly. He even gave me a few tips on grilling to ensure it came out flawless. By the time everything was ready, the house was spotless, and the meal was shaping up to be something special. Finally, the evening arrived, and they showed up right on time. The moment he walked through the door, he wasted no time making a comment. "Nice place," he said, looking around with an expression that didn't match his words. Before I could respond, his girlfriend smacked him lightly on the arm. "Behave," she said with a laugh, diffusing the situation. I couldn't help but smile to myself. At least someone knew how to keep him in line. We moved to the backyard, where I had the grill fired up. The aroma of the marinated meat filled the air, and everyone seemed impressed. When I served the food, his girlfriend complimented the meal immediately. "This is amazing," she said, cutting into her steak. But of course, he couldn't let it go without a comment. "It's interesting," he said, poking at the meat with his fork. "A bit dry, maybe?" I didn't miss a beat. "Well, your girlfriend doesn't seem to think so," I replied, nodding toward her. She looked up from her plate and smiled. "It's perfect," she said. "Relax, sunshine." That shut him up, and I could tell it stung a little. As the evening went on, the conversation turned more casual. We talked about work, upcoming projects, and general office gossip. But I couldn't ignore the way he kept glancing at my wife. It wasn't subtle, and it was starting to irritate me. Finally, I decided to confront it head-on. "Is something wrong?" I asked him directly. He looked startled for a moment, then recovered quickly. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's just those earrings. They remind me of a pair my mother used to wear." That explanation seemed odd, but before I could press further, he changed the subject. "Your wife is incredibly hardworking," he said, turning to me. "She's been staying late at the office, and her dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. If things keep going this way, I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a promotion soon." My wife's face lit up at the comment. "Really?" she asked, her excitement evident. He nodded, smiling in a way that I couldn't quite trust. By the time they left, the evening had gone as smoothly as I could have hoped. Despite his irritating behavior, no major conflicts arose, and my wife seemed genuinely pleased with how things turned out. As we stood by the door, waving them off, she looked at me with a satisfied smile. "See? "That wasn't so bad," she said. I nodded, though my mind was still turning over some of the things he'd said and done. But for now, I let it go. They drove off into the night, leaving us with the quiet of our home once again. Time passed, and the day finally came when my wife was supposed to deliver the cake for her boss's birthday. That morning, she was buzzing with energy as she got everything ready. The cake was a masterpiece, a towering creation she had poured hours into. "Today's the day," she said, carefully packing it into a large box. "We'll hand it off, and they'll love it. He's hosting a corporate party afterward." Her words immediately set me on edge. "Promise me one thing," I said, my tone serious. "Just drop off the cake and leave. Don't stick around for anything else." She hesitated for a moment but finally nodded. "Fine," she said. "I'll just hand it over and go. No big deal." She left the house soon after, cake in hand, and I went about my day, trying not to think too much about it. Hours passed, and I hadn't heard a word from her. That wasn't unusual, but as the afternoon turned into evening, I started to get uneasy. She had sent a single text saying she was delivering the cake, but there had been nothing since. The silence was strange, and my instincts told me something was off. I decided to give her a call, just to check in. The first call went unanswered. So did the second. By the third, I was starting to get angry. This wasn't like her, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. I thought about calling again, but before I could, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello?" I answered, my voice sharp. On the other end was a man's voice, unfamiliar but mocking. "Hey, man," he said, barely containing his laughter. "You'll never believe this, but your wife just got a big promotion. And let me tell you, she's really celebrating it. Why don't you come down here and see for yourself? Maybe congratulate her while you're at it." His laughter echoed in my ear before he hung up. My blood ran cold. The tone, the words, it all felt wrong. I knew immediately that I couldn't ignore it. I paced the room, trying to think clearly. My eyes fell on the garage door, and an idea struck me. Years ago, back when I lived in the countryside, my father had given me a bear spray canister, a massive one meant for emergencies. It had been sitting in the garage ever since, untouched but still within its expiration date. I opened the garage and rummaged through the shelves until I found it, tucked away behind some old tools. The weight of it in my hand was oddly reassuring. I checked the canister carefully. It was in perfect condition, ready to use if necessary. Memories of my father's voice came back to me as I inspected it. He'd always said it was better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I felt better knowing I had something to even the odds if things turned ugly. The next step was to figure out where she was. I didn't have an exact address, but I knew enough about the office and its layout to make an educated guess. The party was likely happening in one of the company's rented spaces, and it wouldn't take me long to find it. I grabbed my keys and my phone, double-checking that I had everything I needed. My gut was telling me not to waste any more time. Sliding into the driver's seat, I took a deep breath to steady myself. My mind was a mix of anger, worry, and determination. Whatever was happening, I was going to get to the bottom of it. As I started the engine, the sound of it roaring to life felt like a call to action. Without another moment's hesitation, I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the office, ready for whatever awaited me. When I pulled up to the building, the scene inside was immediately chaotic. Through the large windows, I could see a party in full swing, but it was far from any kind of corporate gathering I had imagined. People were sprawled across furniture, drinks in hand, with some clearly crossing boundaries that had no place in a professional setting. The music was loud, and the atmosphere was thick with a sense of abandon. My stomach churned as I stepped out of the car, gripping my phone tightly in one hand. Something about this felt utterly wrong, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. As I entered the building, the air was thick with alcohol and sweat. I scanned the room for any sign of my wife, but found none. Instead, I spotted a man leaning casually against the wall, laughing at something on his phone. Without hesitation, I approached him. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice low but firm. The man blinked at me, confused, until I clarified. "My wife." "Where is she?" When he still didn't respond, I leaned in closer. "If you don't tell me right now, I'll break your face." "Your choice." The threat must have worked because he quickly pointed toward a back room. "She's in there," he stammered. "With some people." I didn't waste any time. Pushing past him, I made my way to the room he had indicated. My heart was pounding, a mix of anger and dread coursing through me. As I approached, the sounds from inside confirmed my worst fears. I pulled out my phone and hit record, not entirely sure what I was about to capture but knowing I would need evidence. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. What I saw froze me in place for a moment. The room was dimly lit, and there she was, surrounded by several men, including that smug bastard from work. She was covered in some kind of liquid, laughing and engaging in something I never thought I'd witness. They were so caught up in whatever they were doing that they didn't even notice me standing there. My hand tightened around my phone as I continued recording, capturing every detail. The betrayal cut deeper with each passing second, but I forced myself to stay silent. This wasn't the time for confrontation, not yet. Once I had enough footage, I quietly stepped back out of the room, my mind racing. My chest felt tight, and my anger threatened to boil over, but I needed to stay focused. Returning to my car, I grabbed the bear spray canister and the knife I had brought. The weight of them felt grounding, a reminder that I wasn't powerless in this situation. I took a moment to steady myself before heading back inside, determined to end this madness once and for all. I walked straight to the main office area, ignoring the stares and laughter of the partygoers around me. Finding a central spot, I placed the canister on the floor, pulled out the knife, and punctured it with a quick, decisive motion. The pressurized spray erupted instantly, filling the room with an intense, choking mist. Screams and coughing erupted as people scrambled to escape the irritant, their revelry coming to an abrupt end. I stood there for a moment, watching the chaos unfold, before turning on my heel and heading for the exit. The fresh air outside hit me like a slap, clearing my lungs and my head. I tossed the now empty canister into the back seat of my car and took a moment to collect myself. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins. The events of the past hour felt surreal, but there was no time to dwell on it now. I had done what I needed to do. It was time to go home. Driving away, I kept the windows down, letting the cool night air wash over me. My mind replayed everything I had seen and done, each detail etching itself into my memory. The phone with the recording sat on the passenger seat, a silent witness to the betrayal I had uncovered. Despite the anger and hurt still simmering inside me, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. For now, I focused on the road ahead, leaving the chaos of the party far behind. The next morning, I wasted no time putting things into motion. While my wife was still absent, I started packing up all of her belongings. Clothes, shoes, accessories, everything went into bags and boxes. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. Each item felt like another piece of her betrayal, and I was determined to rid myself of it all. Once everything was packed, I took it straight to the dumpster behind the house. Watching the bags disappear into the pile of trash gave me a sense of finality. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. After dealing with her personal items, I turned my attention to the valuables in the house. All the cash we had stashed away, I took and hid in my own secret spot, a small compartment behind a false panel in the basement. It was a place she didn't know about, and I was confident it would remain safe there. Her jewelry followed, each piece tucked away with care. Finally, I gathered up the electronics, laptops, tablets, anything of value, and locked them in the garage. She wasn't going to have access to anything she could use to manipulate the situation further. By the time I was finished, the house felt noticeably emptier. Her absence, both physical and emotional, had already started to take hold. But instead of sadness, I felt a growing resolve. This wasn't about punishment or revenge, it was about taking control of my life again. She had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. I spent the rest of the day tidying up the space, making sure everything was in order before the inevitable confrontation. That evening, she finally returned home. As she walked through the door, her expression quickly changed when she saw the bare spaces where her things used to be. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with confusion. I didn't answer immediately, instead gesturing for her to sit down at the table. "Sit," I said firmly. She hesitated but eventually complied, sensing the seriousness of the moment. I pulled out my phone, holding it in my hand but not yet showing her anything. "Let me tell you a story," I began, my voice steady. "Once, there was a wife who thought she could outsmart her husband. She lied to him, betrayed him, and even went so far as to bake a cake for her lover. But the husband wasn't as blind as she thought. He found out everything. He even recorded it all on video." As I spoke, her face grew paler with every word. By the time I finished, she looked like she might faint. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not true. It was a joke, a prank. You're taking it way too seriously." Her excuses only fueled my anger. "A prank?" I repeated, my tone icy. "You expect me to believe that? Your things are already in the trash, so you can leave anytime. I'm done with your lies." She shot up from her seat, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't just throw me out. This is my home too. We can talk about this. Please, just let me explain." But I wasn't interested in hearing her out. The images from last night were burned into my memory, and no amount of talking was going to change that. She began to cry, her voice cracking as she pleaded with me to reconsider. "You don't understand," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't what it looked like. I made a mistake, but it doesn't mean anything. We can fix this." I shook my head, unmoved by her display. "It means everything," I replied. "And we can't fix this. It's over." Her desperation turned to anger, and she started yelling, accusing me of being heartless and unreasonable. But I stayed firm, standing my ground as she spiraled into a full-blown tantrum. She screamed, cried, and even threw a chair across the room in frustration. But nothing she said or did could change my mind. I opened the door and pointed outside. "Leave," I said firmly. "Now." She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her face a mix of fury and defeat. Finally, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was also liberating. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was alone with my thoughts, free from the weight of her lies. I locked the door and took a deep breath, ready to start rebuilding my life. The day after my wife's departure, I sat down with my phone and the videos I'd recorded. The anger and betrayal still burned in my chest, but I knew that there was one more person who needed to be held accountable. The smug bastard who orchestrated and encouraged everything wasn't going to walk away unscathed. After careful consideration, I decided to send the evidence to the one person who could bring him to justice, his girlfriend. She deserved to know the truth about the man she thought she loved, and I knew she could make a bigger impact than I could alone. I found her number through some old messages and composed a text. Keeping it brief, I attached the video and wrote, "You need to see this. You deserve to know who you're dealing with." I hit send and waited. It didn't take long for her to call me, her voice trembling with shock and anger. "I can't believe this," she said, clearly trying to process what she had just seen. "What am I supposed to do now?" I didn't sugarcoat my response. "You know exactly what you need to do," I said. "Take this to your CEO. Send it anonymously if you have to, but make sure the company knows who they're dealing with." She hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "All right," she said. "I'll handle it." The following day, she called me back. Her tone was different, calmer, more resolute. I did it, she said. I sent the video to the CEO last night, and they've already started taking action. They called me into a meeting this morning to discuss what happened, and it looks like they're not wasting any time. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice as she described the fallout. The smug manager, my ex-wife, her friends, and several others involved in the scandal were all terminated on the spot. It's like a clean sweep, she added. They're clearing out everyone who was part of that mess. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Sounds like the company's finally doing the right thing, I said. What about you? How are you holding up? She hesitated for a moment before responding. They offered me the department head position, she admitted, her voice tinged with disbelief. I didn't expect it, but they said they need someone they can trust to rebuild the team. I congratulated her, genuinely happy that she was being rewarded for her integrity. You deserve it, I said. Make the most of it. As the conversation continued, she surprised me with another suggestion. You know, she said, we're going to need a lot of new people to fill the gaps. If you're interested, I could put in a word for you. You've clearly got the kind of mindset this place needs. The offer caught me off guard, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had been considering my next steps, and this seemed like an opportunity to turn a terrible situation into something positive. Over the next few days, I gave it serious thought. The idea of working in the same company that had been the backdrop for so much drama was initially unappealing, but the chance to make a fresh start outweighed my reservations. After all, the old team was gone, and with her in charge, I had faith that things would be different. Finally, I called her back and accepted the offer. Let's do it, I said. I'm ready for something new. The onboarding process was quick, and before I knew it, I was part of the team. The work was challenging but rewarding, and the environment felt completely different from what I had expected. She ran the department with a steady hand, and her leadership set the tone for a culture of professionalism and respect. It wasn't long before I found my rhythm, contributing to projects and earning the trust of my new colleagues. As weeks turned into months, I couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come. What had started as one of the darkest periods of my life had turned into a chance for renewal. I had shed the toxic elements that had been weighing me down and stepped into a role where I could truly thrive. Each day brought new challenges, but also a sense of purpose and satisfaction that I hadn't felt in years. Even outside of work, things began to stabilize. I focused on rebuilding my personal life, reconnecting with old friends, and pursuing hobbies I had neglected for too long. The bitterness and anger that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. I wasn't defined by what had happened, I was defined by how I had chosen to move forward. Looking back, I realized that the decisions I had made, no matter how difficult at the time, had led me to a better place. The mess I had walked away from was a distant memory, overshadowed by the progress I had made. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. And as I walked into the office each morning, I knew I had made the right choice. The day the divorce papers were finalized marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Sitting across from her in the courtroom, I felt no regret for what was about to unfold. The evidence I had collected spoke louder than any argument she could muster. When the judge reviewed the video, it became clear that there was no room for her to contest the terms. By the end of the proceedings, she had lost all claims to our shared assets. The house, the savings, and everything we had built together were now solely in my name. She left the courthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a ride to her mother's house. Once the dust settled, I turned my attention to securing my future. I decided to sell the old house, wanting nothing to do with the memories it held. The funds went toward purchasing a new property in a quieter area, far from the drama that had plagued my life. Before leaving, I meticulously packed and transported everything of value, cash, important documents, and heirlooms, to ensure there were no loose ends. By the time the house was on the market, it was nothing more than an empty shell, stripped of any personal significance. Moving into the new house felt like a fresh start. It was modern, secluded, and exactly what I needed. I installed security cameras and reinforced the locks, not out of paranoia, but as a precaution. My ex-wife's behavior had been unpredictable, and I wasn't about to take any chances. I settled into the new space quickly, appreciating the silence and the lack of reminders of her. It was the first time in months that I felt like I could breathe. Weeks passed, and for a while, it seemed like she had disappeared from my life entirely. But then, one evening, I heard a loud banging on the front door. Peering through the peephole, I saw her standing there, her face pale and desperate. She was shouting, begging me to let her in. "We can fix this," she cried. "Please, just give me another chance." I didn't open the door. Instead, I spoke through it, my tone firm and unyielding. "There's nothing left to fix. Go home." Her pleas turned to sobs, and eventually, she left, her footsteps fading into the night. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Late one night, I woke to the smell of something burning. Panic surged through me as I jumped out of bed and ran to the front door. The source of the smell was clear: someone had set the door on fire. Thankfully, the flames hadn't spread far, and I managed to put them out quickly. Once the immediate danger was over, I checked the security footage. Sure enough, there she was, caught in the act. Her face was unmistakable, and the footage left no room for doubt. The next morning, I took the evidence straight to the police. I explained the situation, handed over the video, and let them handle the rest. It didn't take long for them to track her down and bring her in for questioning. The case was airtight, and she had no choice but to admit to what she had done. The court handed down a heavy fine, one that I knew would take her years to pay off. It was a fitting consequence for her reckless behavior. The aftermath was surprisingly quiet. Word got around quickly about what she had done, and the shame of it seemed to weigh heavily on her. She didn't try to contact me again, nor did she make any further attempts to disrupt my life. The fine and the legal repercussions were enough to keep her in check. Whatever lingering resentment she had, she kept it to herself. For the first time since the ordeal began, I felt a true sense of closure. With her out of the picture, I was finally able to focus on moving forward. The new house became my sanctuary, a place where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. The lessons I had learned through this experience were hard-earned, but they left me stronger and more self-assured. As for her, I had no doubt that the consequences of her actions had left a lasting impression. Whatever plans she might have had to stir up more trouble, they were now buried under the weight of her own mistakes.